What a beautiful day.
It's perfect for fall.
The coolness in the air.
Yeah.
We finally made it through that brutal summer. I thought I was going to have to get a sweater this morning.
I did too. It was 66 on my watch.
Wonderful, wonderful. So, aside from the weather change, this to me is one of the best seasons of the year for us, really better than our spring. And there's so many herbs that come this time of year that we don't have access to or don't thrive in our summer warm climate. So let's talk about them.
Well, I've always said, at least for the last few years, that October 1st is New Year's Day for herbs.
Yes.
And it's because we've learned that if we wait until the heat of the summer is over, for one thing, there are more herbs available.
Right.
And for another thing, we can plant things that we can enjoy throughout the year.
Right.
I encourage people to look at the tags on the plants they buy. Many of the herbs that we plant in the fall, because the weather is good for them during that cool season,
Right.
are perennial herbs rather than annuals.
They are.
And so it's really a good thing to look at the tag and see what it is that you're actually picking out.
Right. So let's run through a few examples of what has newly arrived for planting for this fall. And then some of the old favorites that are year-round.
And some of the ones that we've pulled together this morning are really the old classics, the old favorites. And
they truly, truly are.
We never stop talking about them.
Truly are. So let's start with, I know one of your favorites because you do a lot of container gardening.
Yes.
It's thyme.
Thyme is excellent in containers. It likes the good drainage. It likes being put in a place where it gets a full day of sun. Even in the winter, we need sun on certain things.
Right, but it's not as big a concern as dealing with the summer sun.
Not at all.
Because our winter sun, full sun, is great.
Great for
anything.
Yes. And most of the herbs that we're going to talk about today are just very, very happy through our winter.
Perfect.
And there are many times, I know, on the shelves throughout the herb house today, there are more times than I could count. And I know, as a matter of practice, you stock things that like our zone.
Everything's locally grown.
Yes.
So it's going to be acclimated to the heat when it arrives here, or the cold, whichever it may be.
Yeah.
So you can feel perfectly safe. If you see it on the shelf, it's time to plant it.
It's time to plant it.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Now, this is one that everyone wants to grow.
Yes.
But oftentimes have a few issues with.
Yes.
Are lavenders.
Yes. Lavender is not happy in a hot, humid climate.
Right.
And the only thing I can tell you about growing lavender here is stick with tried and true varieties for our climate, for our zone, and pay attention to what Madeline Hill taught us.
Yes.
And what Madeline taught us was water on the soil around the herb, not on the whole plant.
Right.
That keeps it from being overly humidified. And instead of ordinary mulch, use gravel mulch around the base of the lavender. That helps the water drain on through to the soil rather than steaming the foliage.
Plant itself.
Yeah.
And as you've often said, these are Mediterranean plants.
Yes, they are.
So we think of the hillsides, the rocky, the breezes, which we don't often have.
We don't often have. But it's still worth growing lavender. I personally grow it in a container because I can move it into a favorable spot.
Right.
Or if it's not looking well, I can transplant it to a new pot with fresh soil inside.
Perfect. And another one of Madeline's.
Yes.
We can't talk enough about Madeline.
We can't. And we love doing it because she was so important to all of us. Madeline Hill is the reason that we have herbs in this region.
Yes.
Because of the experimentation she did and the research she did.
And this is one
And
product
this is
of
one
that.
product of that. It is a sage that really likes our zone. It grows to be a beautiful, beautiful full plant. It blooms, one of the first bloomers in the spring. I love that about it.
Beautiful sky blue.
Sky blue flowers early on. And then when it needs cutting back, it responds very favorably.
It really does.
It's called Nevaeh R. It's a correct pronunciation of it from
Israel, is it not?
from Israel. This was developed in Israel for growing in the really, really hot gardens there in the fields even. They wanted to grow a sage that could be harvested with a combine.
Oh, wow.
So this was one.
Perfect.
It performed well there, and it performs well here.
And then speaking of Madeline,
Speaking of Madeline, she came across this rosemary when she was still at Festival Hill, and somebody brought her one of these plants, I believe from California.
Okay.
And it's been christened informally Blue Lady. It is a prostrate rosemary, makes a beautiful mound in the garden, and the flowers are blooming. And wouldn't you say they're really numerous in the winter?
I think it's the best blooming rosemary I've seen, hands down. Once it gets established, it almost seems like it's constantly in bloom. It's gorgeous.
It is.
Not the most flavorful for cooking,
Right.
but it's a beautiful landscape plant.
It is.
And as you've mentioned many, many times, they were landscape plants before they were kitchen plants.
Yes, they were. They
Yes.
were wild in the landscape,
Yes.
too.
And so again,
Another
staying with
Madeline,
Madeline, we have ARP.
She looked out her cousin's window in Arp, Texas one winter day and saw a beautiful rosemary plant growing in the neighbor's garden. And she took pieces of it and began to propagate it, and she named it Arp because that's where she found it.
Arp, Texas.
And it's one of our best.
It
it's
is.
an upright rosemary, fantastic in the garden, and great to cook with.
Perfect. Now, another plant that people often complain about not being able to grow because they don't plant it now
yes.
is parsley.
Yes, indeed. Parsley is a wonderful, cool season herb for us in our garden. It loves being planted in the ground.
Yeah.
Nothing fancy about it. You can cut it back and it regrows. Feel free to use it,
Yes.
but plant it in the fall.
Good butterfly guy too.
Good.
And on that note, dill.
Dill.
Everybody wants their dill ready when it's time to harvest the cucumbers to make pickles.
Yeah.
It doesn't quite work that way in our climate.
No, sadly, but there are ways around it. There are ways
Yes.
to freeze stalks of dill,
Right.
wrap it in plastic bags and freeze it in your. Keep it until the cucumbers come ready.
Right.
But this is definitely a cool season favorite.
Absolutely. And again, a great landscape plant with this
Beautiful.
texture. And in the spring, the butterflies love it.
Love it.
As they do the fennel.
The bronze fennel. I usually have dill and fennel together in a large container. I like to see the both of them filled out and going through the winter months looking so lovely. They're just graceful.
They are.
Now sometimes I lose the dill when it gets hot.
Yes.
And then I have a gap in that pot. Well, just plant sunflowers or something.
There
know,
you go.
So,
So, October, November, December, almost year round, but especially during the cooler seasons, it's time to plant your herbs.
absolutely. Put October 1st on your calendar where it says October 1st. Write in New Year's Day for herbs and get busy with your garden.
Let's go plant.
Let's go.